The storm came without warning that September night, turning the Arizona high country into a churning sea of mud and debris. Clara Walsh stood at her cabin window, watching the rain slash against the glass like thrown needles. The single oil lamp on the table cast her shadow long and thin across the rough-hewn floor. She'd been alone for 3 months now since the mine collapse took Samuel. 3 months of mending fences, hauling water, and sleeping with the Winchester propped against the bedpost. The storm worried her less than what it might wash down from the mountain's loose stones, uprooted trees, sometimes worse things. Thunder cracked overhead, and in its echo, she heard something else, a sound that didn't belong to wind or water. Clara pressed her ear to the door, straining to hear past the storm's fury. Then a low moan, almost human, coming from near the collapsed fence line. She pulled on Samuel's old oilskin coat and grabbed the lantern. The Winchester came too, heavy and reassuring in her hands. Her father had been a field medic in the Mexican War, had taught her to shoot straight and stitch clean. "Fear's just good sense," he'd say, "but it shouldn't stop you from doing what needs doing." The door fought her, wind trying to slam it shut, then yanking it wide. Rain hit her face like cold buckshot. She held the lantern high, its light barely cutting through the downpour. The moaning came again, closer to the barn. 20 yards from the house, she found him. He lay half buried in mud where the flash flood had dumped him against a fallen fence post. Even in the lamp's weak glow, she could see he was Apache, the long black hair, the distinctive cut of his clothing, blood mixed with rainwater, pooling beneath his left side. Clara's finger found the trigger guard. Apache raids had been increasing since spring. Just last month, the Hendricks ranch had lost horses, and old Tom Hendricks swore he'd seen warriors watching from the ridgeline. But this man wasn't watching anything. His eyes rolled back, showing white, and his breathing came in short, wet gasps. She could leave him, should leave him. Most would say, let the storm finish what someone's bullet had started. But her father's voice echoed in memory. A life's a life. Clara, girl. The good Lord doesn't ask what language a man speaks when he counts souls. Setting the rifle within reach, she knelt in the mud. The wound was high on his chest, just below the collarbone, still bleeding, but not the bright arterial spray that meant certain death. Someone had shot him from a distance. The wound was clean through. No bullet lodged inside. The man's eyes fluttered open, focused on her face with surprising intensity. His hand moved toward his belt, where a knife handle protruded. Clara grabbed his wrist, feeling the fever already burning through his skin. "No," she said firmly, though she doubted he understood. "I'm trying to help." His strength gave out, arm dropping back into the mud. Clara made her decision. Slinging the rifle over her shoulder, she grabbed him under the arms and began dragging him toward the cabin. He was heavier than he looked, lean muscle and sinew, and her boots slipped in the mud with every step. Twice she fell, landing hard on her knees, but she didn't let go. By the time she got him inside, her back screamed and her hands were raw. She left him on the floor while she stoked the stove, throwing in extra wood until the heat pushed back the storm's chill. Only then did she turn to the harder task. She cut away his shirt with her sewing scissors, revealing the full extent of the damage. The bullet had passed through clean, but the wound was already angry and swollen. She'd seen infection kill men stronger than this one. Working quickly, she boiled water, tore clean strips from her last good petticoat, and fetched the bottle of carbolic acid from the medicine shelf. The Apache woke when she poured the acid into the wound. His body arched, a strangled cry escaping his lips. But he didn't strike out, his dark eyes fixed on her face, swimming with pain but alert. "I know it hurts," Clara murmured, working steadily. "But it's this, or the fever takes you." She packed the wound with clean cloth soaked in willow bark tea, her grandmother's remedy for bringing down fever and easing pain. The front wound was bad enough, but when she rolled him to check the exit wound, she found it worse, larger, ragged where the bullet had torn free, more acid, more packing. And through it all, he watched her with those fever-bright eyes. By the time she finished, her spare room looked like a battlefield hospital. Blood-soaked rags filled the wash basin, and the sharp smell of carbolic acid overwhelmed even the wood smoke. She'd used the last of her good linen and half her winter's supply of willow bark. The Apache had slipped back into unconsciousness, but his breathing seemed easier. Clara dragged her rocking chair close to where he lay and settled in with the Winchester across her lap. Outside, the storm raged on. But something else had her attention now, the sound of hoofbeats, fading into the distance. Someone had been close, maybe watching the cabin. Someone who'd shot this man and might have followed him through the storm. But they were gone now, headed east toward Millerton, or perhaps circling back to wait for daylight. Clara checked the Apache's pulse, rapid but strong, and pulled a quilt over him. The firelight played across his face. Younger than she'd first thought. Maybe 25 summers. Scars marked his arms and chest. Old wounds that spoke of a hard life. His hands were calloused from weapons and work, but his fingers were long and surprisingly delicate. She'd saved him, for now, but come morning, she'd have to decide what to do with a wounded Apache warrior in her home, while someone out there might be planning to finish what they'd started. The storm showed no sign of letting up. Clara settled deeper into her chair, rifle ready, and began her vigil. In the corner of the room, Samuel's photograph watched from the mantel, his serious face frozen in time. She wondered what he'd think of her harboring an Apache, but Samuel was gone, and the living demanded more attention than the dead. The warrior stirred, mumbling words in his own tongue. His hand moved restlessly, as if reaching for something. Clara caught it in her own, surprised by her boldness. His fingers curled around hers, holding tight even in sleep. "You're safe," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if that was true for either of them. Thunder crashed again, and in the distance, she could swear she heard horses. But when she listened harder, there was only rain and wind and the labored breathing of the man whose life she now held in her hands. The night stretched ahead, long and uncertain. Clara Walsh, widow and keeper of a dangerous secret, settled in to wait for dawn. The fever came in waves, pulling the Apache under and casting him up again like driftwood on a violent shore. Clara kept her vigil through the first day, spooning willow bark tea between his cracked lips whenever he surfaced. He fought her at first, weakly batting at the cup, but she persisted with the patient firmness she'd once used with Samuel during his bout with pneumonia. On the second morning, his eyes opened clear for the first time. He stared at the rough-beamed ceiling, then slowly turned his head to find her sitting beside him. His hand moved to his chest, feeling the bandages. "Water?" Clara said, lifting the cup. She demonstrated drinking, then held it to his lips. He drank carefully, eyes never leaving her face. When he'd had enough, he spoke a string of words in his own tongue, questioning, perhaps demanding. Clara shook her head. "I don't understand." She pointed to herself. Clara Walsh." He was silent for a long moment, then pointed to his chest. The word he spoke was soft, complex, full of sounds her tongue couldn't shape. He saw her struggle and said simply, "Satso." "Satso," she repeated, and something flickered in his eyes, surprise, maybe, or approval. The morning routine became a delicate dance. Clara would bring food, thin porridge at first, then soup with bits of rabbit meat. He'd eat slowly, watching her every move. She changed his bandages while he lay still as stone, only the tightening around his eyes betraying pain. By the third day, she found him sitting up, examining her cabin with sharp intelligence. His gaze lingered on Samuel's photograph, the rifle in the corner, the sparse furnishings that spoke of a woman alone. When Clara entered with fresh bandages, he was holding her kitchen knife, testing its edge with his thumb. Her hand went to the pistol at her waist she'd taken to wearing Samuel's Colt since that first night. But the Apache merely shook his head and began working the blade against the whetstone she kept by the stove. The rhythmic scraping filled the silence between them. When he finished, the knife could split a hair. He set it carefully on the table and pointed to the loose cabinet door hanging crooked on its hinges. Clara nodded, understanding. While she worked at the stove, he fixed the door, movements careful but sure despite his injury. This became their way. He noticed what needed mending: the wobbling table leg, the gap in the wall chinking, the barn door that wouldn't latch properly. Using gestures and patience, he'd indicate what he needed: wood, nails, leather strips. Clara would bring the materials and watch him work, his hands steady and skilled despite the healing wound. She learned to read his silences, the tight stillness when his wound pained him, the alert watchfulness when riders passed on the distant road, the softer quiet when he worked, absorbed in the task like Samuel used to be in his ledgers. On the fourth night, the fever returned with vengeance. Satso thrashed and called out, sweat pouring from his body. Names, perhaps, or prayers Clara couldn't tell. She bathed his face with cool water and held him when the shaking grew too violent, her arms around his shoulders to keep him from tearing open the wound. In his delirium, he spoke broken English words: horse, river, soldiers, and once, clearly, brother. Clara pieced together fragments of a story, a raid, perhaps, or an ambush. Someone lost the brother he called for when dawn broke. The fever had passed, but Satso lay weak as a newborn colt, barely able to lift his head. She made a decision then. Hitching up the wagon, she drove to Millerton for supplies. The general store buzzed with talk that made her blood run cold. Armies putting bounties on Apache scalps. Jake Morrison said, loading flour into her wagon. $20 each. That new chief's got them all riled up, young buck. They say, trying to unite the scattered bands. Dangerous times. Clara agreed carefully. Any word on raids nearby? Patrol came through 3 days back, Jake's wife added, eyeing Clara's purchase of extra medical supplies. Said they winged one of them savages but lost him in the storm. You best be careful out there alone. Mrs. Walsh. Clara kept her face neutral. I keep the Winchester handy. Back at the cabin, she found Satso standing by the window, watching the road. He'd fashioned a crutch from a broken hoe handle and wrapped his wound fresh. When she entered, he turned, and she saw he'd been studying her husband's mining maps on the wall. Soldiers, she said, setting down the supplies. She made a circling gesture. Looking? He nodded, understanding perfectly. That evening, he drew in the dirt floor with a stick mountains, passes, water sources. He pointed to her cabin, then sketched a route north into the peaks, a question in his eyes. Not yet, Clara said. Too weak. She touched his bandaged chest gently. He caught her hand, held it for a moment. His skin was cooler now, the fever truly broken. He spoke earnestly in his own language, and though she couldn't understand the words, the tone was clear. Gratitude, perhaps something more. That night, she woke to find him standing guard by the window, her rifle in his hands. He'd heard what she'd missed: horses on the road, moving slow and careful. They passed without stopping, but Satso remained at the window until dawn. The fifth day brought unexpected intimacy. His wound needed deep cleaning, and as Clara worked, he told her things in his language, voice low and steady like he was sharing secrets. She found herself talking too about Samuel, the mine, her loneliness. Neither understood the other's words, but somehow that made it easier. He showed her scars, a blade wound on his ribs, an old burn on his shoulder. For each one, a story told in gestures and expressions, battles, hunts, ceremonies. She showed him her own marks: the burn from the stove when she was 12, the deep cut on her palm from her first winter alone. As she worked, he studied her face with such intensity it made her cheeks warm. When she finished wrapping the bandage, he caught her wrist gently. With his other hand, he pointed to her, then to himself, then made a gesture she'd seen before: hands pressed together, then slowly parting. You have to go, she said quietly. I know. But he shook his head, frustrated. He tried again the same gesture, but then bringing his hands back together. Separate, then joining. A promise, perhaps, or a question. That evening, Satso insisted on helping with chores. He was steadier now, moving with the controlled grace of a healing predator. They worked in companionable silence, feeding chickens, checking fence lines. He showed her how to read tracks: rabbit, coyote, human. The last made him frown, studying the boot prints near the well. 2 men, Clara said, remembering her father's lessons. Yesterday. He nodded approval at her observation, then pointed to marks she'd missed where they'd stood watching the cabin. Cigarette butts ground into the dirt. His face grew hard, and she saw the warrior beneath the patient. The 6th morning dawned clear and cold. Clara found Satso dressed in his mended clothes, the wooden falcon he'd carved sitting on the table. He'd worked on it during the quiet hours, shaping it from a piece of juniper with her kitchen knife. Every feather was detailed, wings spread as if ready to soar. He pressed it into her hands, then stepped back. The message was clear. A gift, a farewell. But as he moved toward the door, Clara heard what he'd already detected. Horses, many of them, coming fast. Satso pushed her behind him, reaching for the rifle. Through the window, they saw dust rising from the southern road. He spoke urgently in Apache, then tried English. "Go, trees, now!" But Clara Walsh had made her choice days ago, when she dragged a bleeding enemy from the mud. She stepped beside him, Samuel's Colt steady in her hand. "No," she said simply. "We face this together." The riders were coming. In minutes, they'd know if it was the army, Satso's people, or something worse. The wooden falcon lay cool in Clara's palm, wings spread toward an uncertain sky. The riders turned out to be cowboys from the Double Bar Ranch, moving cattle to winter pasture. Clara recognized Tom Brennan's bay mare and relaxed, though Satso remained tense until they'd passed. That afternoon, he disappeared into the mountains, leaving only the wooden falcon as proof he'd been there at all. Clara told herself it was for the best. The wound had healed enough for travel, and every day increased the danger for both of them. She returned to her routines, mending, cleaning, tending the vegetable garden. But the cabin felt emptier than before, filled with small repairs that reminded her of careful hands and quiet company. 3 days later, Cyrus Vale came calling. He arrived in a black buggy with brass fittings, 2 armed men riding escort. Clara watched from her doorway as he climbed down, dusting off his broadcloth suit. Everything about him spoke of money, from the gold watch chain to the polished boots that had never known honest work. "Mrs. Walsh." He touched his hat brim, smile wide as a snake's. "I hope I'm not intruding. Mr. Vale." She didn't invite him in. "What brings you out this way?" Neighborly concern. His pale eyes swept her property, calculating. "A widow alone, trying to work this harsh land, it troubles my Christian conscience." Clara's hand rested on the doorframe, inches from the Winchester. "I manage well enough." "Do you—" He gestured at the sagging fence, the weed-choked field. "Samuel was a good man, but he's gone. This land needs a firm hand, proper resources. I'm prepared to make a generous offer." "It's not for sale." His smile tightened. $500. Cash money. Enough to start fresh somewhere civilized. "The answer is no, Mr. Vale. 700. Clara started to close the door. One of his men, a thick-necked brute with scarred knuckles, put his boot against it. "The lady's being hasty, Mr. Vale," the man said. "Maybe she needs time to reconsider." "That's enough, Mac." Vale's voice was mild, but his eyes glittered. "Mrs. Walsh is naturally emotional, recent loss and all. We'll let her think on it." He climbed back into the buggy, then turned. "Oh, I nearly forgot. There's been Apache sign in the area. Dangerous times for a woman alone. Why, anything could happen. Fences cut, wells fouled, stock runoff. Terrible things. They left in a cloud of dust, but the threat hung in the air like smoke. That night, Clara lay awake planning. She had maybe $300 hidden in the root cellar Samuel's savings, meant for expanding the mine. Not enough to hire hands or buy protection. The sheriff in Millerton was Vale's man, bought and paid for. The nearest federal marshal was 2 days' ride, and he'd need proof of wrongdoing. Morning brought the first harassment. Someone had driven cattle through her vegetable garden in the night, trampling the young corn and beans. Boot prints led to where riders had waited, smoking and watching the house. Clara salvaged what she could, replanting with grim determination. The next week, they cut her fence in 3 places. Her milk cow wandered off through the gap, and it took Clara all day to find her, trapped in a narrow gully. While she was gone, someone had been in the cabin, nothing taken, but everything touched, moved slightly. A message. She started sleeping in shifts, dozing in the chair with the rifle ready. Dark circles grew under her eyes. When she went to town for supplies, people looked away, conversations dying as she passed. Everyone knew Vale wanted her land. Everyone knew what happened to those who stood in his way. "You should consider his offer," Martha Peterson whispered at the general store. "The Hendricks family, they held out too. Their barn burned, cattle disappeared. They sold for half what Vale first offered." Clara loaded her supplies in silence. Back home, she found a dead coyote in her well. It took hours to haul it out, more to clean and purify the water. Her back ached, hands blistered from the rope. As she worked, she felt eyes watching from the hills. Not Vale's men, they made sure she saw them. This was different, patient and still. Sheriff Daly came by the next week, belly straining his vest, badge tarnished with neglect. "Heard you've had some trouble," he said, not bothering to dismount. "Shame about that, well." "Cut fences, too," Clara said evenly. "Garden destroyed, clear boot prints. Drifters, most like, or Apache." He spat tobacco juice. "Hard to prove anything. Best thing might be to move somewhere safer. Maybe sell to someone with the means to protect the place. Like Mr. Vale. Now that you mention it, he is looking to expand." Daly's smile was brown-stained. "Generous man. Mr. Vale supports the law, if you take my meaning." After he left, Clara sat on her porch, watching the sun sink toward the mountains. The land Samuel had loved, had died for, stretched out before her. Good water rights, sheltered grazing, timber on the north slope. Vale wanted it all, and he'd grind her down until she gave in or gave up. That night, they poisoned her chickens. She found them at dawn, scattered around the coop like broken toys. Not coyotes, the fence was intact. Poison grain scattered on the ground, meant to look like she'd been careless with rat bait. Clara gathered the bodies, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her face. Those hens had been her breakfast, her baking, her small hedge against hunger. In town that afternoon, buying replacement chicks she could ill afford, she overheard Mac Doyle at the saloon. "Widow Walsh is getting careless," he said loudly. "Poisoned her own chickens. Woman like that, no man to guide her, bound to have accidents, dangerous, living alone." Clara's hands clenched on the crate of chicks. Around Mac, other Vale men laughed and nodded. The message was clear: accidents would keep happening, each worse than the last. But something else caught her attention. 2 railroad workers at the corner table, voices low but carrying. "That Apache chief, the young one, they say he's pulling the scattered bands together. Heard he speaks English, learned from missionaries, smart as a whip." Smart enough to avoid the army so far. Jackson's patrol spent a week chasing shadows. Clara left quietly, mind racing. A young chief who spoke English. It seemed impossible, but the timing. That night, she made a decision. At dawn, she'd ride to Fort Buchanan, demand to speak to the commander. Maybe federal authority would carry more weight than local law. It was a thin hope, but better than waiting for Vale's next move. She never made it to dawn. Clara woke to smoke and the crackle of flames. The barn was burning, fire already eating through the roof. She grabbed the rifle and ran outside in her nightdress, bare feet stumbling on the rough ground. Riders circled the burning building, whooping and firing into the air. Not Apache, these were white men playing at savagery, trying to make it look like a raid. She recognized Mac Doyle's bulk, saw Vale sitting his horse at a safe distance, watching his investment burn. Clara raised the Winchester, but a rope sailed from the darkness, tangling her arms. She went down hard, rifle spinning away. Mac dismounted, walking slow, savoring the moment. Shame about your barn. Widow, these Apache. They got no respect for property. Everyone knows, Clara started. Everyone knows Apache been raiding. Everyone knows a woman can't hold land alone. He smiled, teeth gleaming in the firelight. Mister, Vale's offer stands, though it might be less considering the damage. Behind him, Vale's men laughed and passed a bottle. None of them saw the shadows flowing down from the hills, silent as smoke. None of them heard death approaching on moccasined feet. Until the first arrow took a rider from his saddle. The night exploded into chaos. War cries echoed from the hillsides as Apache warriors descended like a mountain storm. Vale's men, caught between the burning barn and invisible attackers, fired wildly into the darkness. Horses screamed and bucked, adding to the confusion. Clara rolled away from Mac, who had drawn his pistol and was shooting at shadows. She scrambled for her rifle, but a figure stepped between her and the weapon, tall, painted for war, moving with deadly grace. In the firelight, she recognized the scar on his shoulder, the way he favored his left side where the wound still pulled. Satso had returned, but not as the patient she'd nursed. This was the chief the railroad workers had whispered about, the warrior who was uniting the scattered bands. His face bore red and black paint, and his eyes held no warmth, only the cold promise of retribution. Behind him, more warriors emerged from the darkness. Not a raiding party, this was a war band, disciplined and lethal. They moved through Vale's scattered men like wolves through sheep. Those who tried to flee found their path blocked. Those who stood to fight faced opponents who knew every rock and shadow. Mac Doyle backed toward his horse, still firing. A warrior's club caught him across the shoulders, sending him sprawling. He came up with a knife, slashing wildly. But these weren't the reservation Apache he was used to bullying. These were fighters who'd never bent knee to anyone. Through the melee, Clara saw Cyrus Vale spurring his horse toward the road. An arrow took his hat off. Another grazed his mount's flank. The animal bolted, carrying the land baron into the darkness, his remaining men following in panicked flight. Then, as suddenly as it began, the fighting ended. Vale's men who could ride were gone. 3 lay unmoving near the barn. Others groaned and clutched wounds, abandoned by their employer. The Apache began gathering weapons and horses with practiced efficiency. Satso stood before Clara, chest heaving from exertion. The paint on his face made him seem older, foreign, dangerous. When he spoke, it was in accented but clear English, a shock after their week of gestures and silence. "You are unharmed." Clara found her voice. You speak English." "When it serves." His eyes swept the burning barn, the scattered bodies. "These men, they trouble you before?" "Yes, they—" Clara stopped, suddenly aware of the other warriors watching. Several were very young, boys really, eyes bright with battle fever. Others bore the scars of experience, studying her with suspicion. To them, she was just another white settler on stolen land. An older warrior approached, speaking rapidly in Apache. Satso responded in the same language, gesturing toward Clara. The man's weathered face showed disapproval, but he nodded reluctantly. "This is Naichi," Satso said. He speaks for the elders. He says you saved a life, so a life is owed. The debt will be paid. I don't want, Clara began. Your wants matter little. The hardness in his voice made her step back. You gave life when you could have taken it. This creates obligation. Apache do not leave debts unpaid. He turned to his men, issuing quick orders. Several began dragging the wounded Veil men toward the road. None too gently. Others collected anything useful: guns, ammunition, horses. The efficiency was chilling. Wait, Clara said. Those men need medical attention. They will live or die by their own strength. Satso's expression was stone, as I would have, if not for you. Naichi spoke again, pointing at Clara with obvious displeasure. The words needed no translation what to do with the white woman who'd seen too much. Other warriors joined the discussion, voices rising. Clara understood she stood on the edge of a knife. One wrong word, one perceived threat, and her life would end here. Satso raised his hand for silence. When he spoke in Apache, his tone carried unmistakable authority. The others listened, some nodding, others clearly unhappy. Finally, Naichi made a gesture that looked like reluctant agreement. You will come with us, Satso announced. Clara's heart hammered. I can't leave. This is my home. This, he gestured at the burning barn, the trampled garden, the poisoned ground. This is no home. It is a trap, and the hunter will return with more men, more guns. You saved a chief's life. Now that chief must preserve yours. I won't be a captive. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or respect. Not captive, protected, until the debt is paid. A young warrior ran up, speaking urgently. Satso's face tightened. Riders coming, many. We leave now. I need supplies, clothes. No time, he whistled sharply, and a warrior brought up a horse. Clara's own mare, already saddled. Choose quickly. Come under protection, or stay and face what comes. In the distance, Clara heard hoofbeats, saw torches moving along the road. Veil had found reinforcements, probably claiming Apache attacked his men unprovoked. By dawn, the territory would ring with calls for vengeance. Any Apache found would hang, and anyone who'd helped them. She thought of her empty cabin, her poisoned well, her stolen future. Thought of Samuel, who'd wanted to build something lasting on this land. But Samuel was gone, and the land couldn't shelter her from men like Veil. Clara took the offered reins and mounted. I'll need to get some things. After, Satso swung onto his own horse, a magnificent paint stallion. Now we ride. The war band moved like ghosts, leaving the burning homestead behind. Clara looked back once, seeing her life reduced to a fading glow against the sky. Ahead lay darkness and uncertainty, riding with Apache warriors toward an unknown fate. They rode hard through familiar terrain made strange by night. Clara had explored these hills searching for Samuel's lost cattle, but the Apache knew paths she'd never seen. They moved single file through narrow defiles, across streams that would hide their tracks, always climbing toward the mountain strongholds. No one spoke. The only sounds were horse hooves on stone, the creak of leather, the distant cry of a hunting owl. Clara found herself between Satso and Aichi, very aware of being the only woman, the only white face in the group. After an hour, they stopped to rest the horses. Warriors produced strips of dried meat and water gourds. Sharing among themselves, Clara's stomach growled. She'd had nothing since yesterday's noon meal, but she was too proud to ask. A young warrior, barely 16, shyly offered her his water. She drank gratefully, earning a sharp look from Naichi. Satso noticed the exchange. You make them curious. Apache women would not ride to war. I didn't ride to war. War rode to me. He almost smiled. This is why Naichi worries. You speak like a warrior, but you are... He paused, searching for words. Different. Because I'm white. Because you chose to help an enemy. He studied her in the moonlight. This is not the way of your people. Clara thought of all the good Christians in Millerton who'd turned away while Vale destroyed her life. Maybe I'm not very good at being my people. This time he did smile, quick and surprising. No, you are not. They rode until dawn painted the peaks rose and gold. The warband climbed a hidden trail Clara would never have found alone, emerging onto a plateau where the wind sang through standing stones. Here they stopped, warriors dismounting with evident relief. Satso helped Clara down, his hands careful of proprieties. Rest, we are beyond their reach here. She looked back the way they'd come, seeing only empty wilderness. Will they follow? They will try. His expression was grim. Vale will say Apache burned his barn, attacked his men. The army will come, but they will find only what we choose to show them. The warriors made a cold camp, no fires, nothing to mark their presence. Clara sat on a flat stone, exhausted but unable to sleep. Everything had changed in one night. She was alive, free of Vale's persecution, but at what cost riding with Apache warriors, protected by the very people newspapers called savage enemies. Naichi approached with Satso, his disapproval evident. He spoke at length, gesturing toward Clara, then toward the distant valley. Satso translated, his tone carefully neutral. He says harboring you brings danger to our people. The whites will say we stole you, use it as excuse for more attacks. He thinks it better to leave you at a trading post, let you find your own way. Clara met the older man's eyes steadily. And what do you think? Satso was quiet for a moment. I think the whites need no excuse to attack us. They take our land, poison our water, break every promise. You saved my life when killing me would have been easier, safer. This means something. To you, to honor itself. He stood straighter, every inch the chief she'd glimpsed in firelight. But Naichi speaks wisdom too. You cannot simply ride with us. It would not be. Again he searched for words. Proper, right, there must be another way. Before Clara could ask what he meant, a scout came running. More riders approaching from the east, not army, but Apache. Satso's expression lightened as he recognized the lead rider. My sister, he said, something warm entering his voice. Now we will have answers. Dawn painted the mountains crimson as Clara stood at the edge of the Apache camp, Samuel's wedding ring cold between her fingers. Below, the valley held her former life, the cabin where she'd nursed Satso, the well Vale's men had poisoned, the garden plot where hope had withered. Smoke still rose from the barn's remains, a black smudge against the morning sky. Behind her, the camp stirred to life. Satso's sister, Lilui, tended the morning fire with practiced efficiency. The woman had arrived the previous night with troubling news army patrols were sweeping the territory, and Vale had placed a bounty on any Apache scalp. Worse, he'd told authorities that warriors had kidnapped Clara Walsh, fueling rage among the settlers. You think too much of what was, Lilui said in careful English. She'd learned the language at the same mission school where Satso had spent his boyhood, before the wars called him home. The past is smoke. It cannot warm you. Clara turned the ring over, watching light catch on worn gold. 5 years of marriage, 2 in this place. Everything we built. Is ash? Lily's tone held no cruelty, only truth. My husband fell at Canyon Creek. I wore his memory like chains until I learned the living need more than ghosts. The wooden falcon sat on Clara's lap, wings spread toward possibilities she'd never imagined. Last night, Naichi had presented a stark choice: leave now for a trading post, or commit fully to the path her compassion had opened. There could be no middle ground, no half measures. The Apache lived on the knife's edge between survival and extinction. They couldn't afford the liability of an uncommitted ally. Satso approached from the horse lines, moving with the controlled grace that marked him as both warrior and leader. The paint was gone from his face, but authority sat on his shoulders like a well-worn cloak. He'd spent the night in council, debating Clara's fate with voices that grew increasingly heated as reports of army movements arrived. "It is decided," he said simply. "You choose today." Clara stood, muscles stiff from sleeping on stone. Around them, warriors prepared for whatever came next, checking weapons, tightening saddle girths, sharing quiet words that might be prayers or farewells. These people lived each dawn as if it might be their last, because often it was. "If I stay," she said carefully, "what does that mean?" Satso's dark eyes held hers. "You accept our protection, live by our ways, share our fate." He paused, choosing words with the same precision he'd once used sharpening her knife. "As my wife, you would have status, safety. No one could question your place among us." The proposal landed like a physical blow. Clara had known it might come to this, Lily had hinted as much, but hearing the words made it real. A marriage of, convenience. Of necessity. Something flickered across his face, too quick to read. "I offer shelter, not chains. You would have your own space, your own choices within our ways. I ask only that you not betray us to your people." "They're not my people anymore." The bitterness surprised her. "My people stood by while Vale destroyed everything." "Yet you hesitate." Clara looked at the ring again. Samuel had placed it on her finger in a church in Kansas, promising to love and protect her always. He'd kept that promise until the mountain took him. Now, another man offered protection, but the terms were written in blood and survival, not love and hope. "Your sister thinks I should accept," she said. "Lilui is practical. She sees a woman alone as vulnerable, in your world or ours. She sees how the young warriors look at you with curiosity, how the elders worry about the complications you bring. A chief's wife would be settled, understood. And you, what do you see?" Satso was quiet for a long moment. "I see courage that shames warriors, compassion that crosses enemy lines. I see someone who might bridge two worlds, if such bridges can still be built." His voice dropped. "I also see that I am asking too much, too soon, but time is a luxury we do not have." As if to prove his point, a scout ran into camp, speaking urgently. Satso's expression hardened as he listened. "Cavalry, 2 hours south, moving fast. They have Apache scouts with them reservation police who know our trails." The camp exploded into motion. Warriors grabbed weapons and supplies with practiced efficiency. Women began packing what little they'd unpacked, children helping without complaint. This was their life, always ready to run, to fight, to disappear into the landscape like morning mist. Clara made her decision in that moment, watching a people prepared to vanish rather than surrender. She pulled off Samuel's ring and tucked it into her medicine pouch alongside the falcon carving. The past deserved honor, but the living demanded more. "I'll need my own horse," she told Satso, "and someone to teach me your language properly. I won't be a burden." Relief flickered in his eyes before he mastered it. "You will have both. Lilui will be your teacher. She is," he smiled slightly, "relentless." "One more thing." Clara met his gaze squarely. "This marriage, it protects me, gives me place and purpose. What do you gain?" "An ally who has already proven her worth, a voice who might speak for us to those who would listen. And—" He hesitated, then continued more softly. "Perhaps a chance to know the woman who saw a wounded enemy and chose mercy." Nietzsche approached, his weathered face grave but no longer hostile. He spoke to Satso, then turned to Clara, in heavily accented English. He said, "You choose difficult path. Apache way is hard hunger, running, always fighting. You understand." "I understand survival," Clara replied. "I understand that staying in that valley means death, just slower." The old warrior nodded slowly. "Then you are welcome, for now. Prove yourself, and welcome becomes belonging." Within minutes, the band was ready to move. Clara mounted her mare, now laden with Apache gear instead of ranch supplies. Lilui rode beside her, already beginning the language lessons with pointed gestures and repeated words. Behind them, two warriors erased signs of their presence with brush branches. As they climbed higher into the mountains, Clara looked back one last time. Far below, dust clouds marked the cavalry's approach to her empty homestead. They'd find the burned barn, the scattered bodies of Vale's men, and draw their own conclusions. By nightfall, every newspaper in the territory would scream about Apache atrocities and the kidnapped white woman. "Her regrets?" Satso asked, guiding his paint stallion beside her. "No." Clara surprised herself with the certainty. "Questions, fears, doubts, plenty of those, but not regrets." "Good. Regret is weight we cannot carry on these trails." He pointed ahead, where the path disappeared into a narrow canyon. "Beyond is our winter camp, small but secure. There we will speak the words that bind us, and you will begin to learn what it means to be Apache. And if I fail, then you fail, but I have seen you drag a dying man from mud, tend wounds with steady hands, face armed men without flinching." A rare smile touched his lips. "I think you will not fail." They rode into the canyon as the sun climbed toward noon. Behind them, the cavalry would find nothing but cold ashes and mysteries. Ahead lay an uncertain future with a people not her own, bound by a marriage of necessity to a man she barely knew. Yet as the canyon walls rose around them, sheltering and confining in equal measure, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced since Samuel's death purpose. She was choosing her fate rather than letting others dictate it. That had to count for something. Lilui began teaching her the word for the red-tailed hawk circling overhead. "Itza," she repeated patiently. "In our stories, Red-tail sees all paths. Good sign for new beginnings." Clara practiced the unfamiliar sounds as they rode deeper into Apache territory. Each word was a step away from her old life, a commitment to the choice she'd made. Somewhere behind them, Cyrus Vale was learning that his victim had escaped. Somewhere ahead, a life she couldn't yet imagine waited to be built. The wooden falcon rode in her pouch next to Samuel's ring past and future together, carried close to her heart as she crossed the threshold between worlds. The winter camp nestled in a hidden valley where hot springs sent steam curling through pine trees. Clara's first sight of it stole her breath, perhaps 50 wickiups arranged in careful patterns, smoke rising from morning fires, children's laughter mixing with the sound of running water. After weeks of running and hiding, it seemed impossible that such peace could exist. Her arrival caused a stir. Women emerged from their dwellings to stare at the white woman riding beside their chief. Children peered from behind their mothers' skirts. Warriors who hadn't been with the raiding party stood with hands near weapons, uncertain whether she was guest or captive. Lilui guided Clara to a small wickiup set slightly apart. "Yours," she said simply, "until the ceremony. After, you share with my brother." Inside, Clara found unexpected comforts: soft furs for bedding, woven baskets for storage, a fire pit with stones already arranged. Someone had prepared this space with care. She set down her few possessions, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. The ceremony would be simple, Lilui explained. Apache marriages required no priests or papers, only witnesses and accepted custom. But first, Clara must prove herself useful to the band. A chief's wife who couldn't contribute would bring shame to everyone. "What can you do?" Lilui asked bluntly, "besides shoot and doctor wounds?" Clara thought of her life before cooking, preserving, mending, keeping house, skills that seemed small against the harsh realities of Apache life. "I can work. I'm not afraid of hard labor." "Good. You will need that." The next days blurred together in a haze of learning. Clara woke before dawn to help prepare communal meals, grinding mesquite pods into flour until her arms ached. She learned to identify edible plants, to scrape and tan hides, to weave yucca fibers into rope. Her hands, already calloused from ranch work, developed new patterns of hardness. The women watched her struggle with mixture of skepticism and curiosity. Some, like Nietzsche's wife Ella, maintained careful distance. Others gradually warmed to her efforts. When Clara's first attempt at acorn bread burned to charcoal, a grandmother named Apache showed her the proper technique with patient hands. "White women usually too soft," Apache said in broken English. "You different. Have strong spirit. This good Apache life breaks soft spirits." Satso kept respectful distance during these trials, but Clara felt his presence like heat from a distant fire. He had duties as chief councils to lead, hunting parties to organize, disputes to settle. Yet she'd catch him watching as she worked, something unreadable in his dark eyes. The first real test came when young Nitus fell ill with fever. The boy, no more than 7 winters, burned hot enough to frighten his mother. The band's medicine man was away, gathering sacred plants in the mountains. Eyes turned to Clara, the white woman who'd saved their chief. Clara knelt beside the child, fighting down panic. She had her father's teachings, her grandmother's herb knowledge. But what if Apache bodies responded differently? What if she made things worse? "Please," the mother whispered in Apache. Clara didn't need translation to understand the desperation. She called for willow bark, elderflower, clean water. The women brought what she needed without question, now crisis erasing boundaries. Clara worked through the night, cooling the child's fever with damp cloths, spooning medicine between his lips, singing the old lullabies her mother had used. By dawn, Nitus's fever broke. He woke asking for water and food, weak but clear-eyed. His mother wept with relief, clasping Clara's hands around them. The watching women murmured approval. Even Ela nodded grudgingly. "You have gift," Apache pronounced. "Healing hands, this valuable as warrior's strength." But not everyone was convinced. Bidzi, a young warrior who'd expected to marry within the band, made his displeasure known. He spoke against Clara in council, questioning her loyalty, her motives. Why would a white woman choose Apache life unless forced or mad? The challenge came to a head during a communal hunt preparation. Clara was learning to repair arrow fletching when Bidzi accidentally knocked her work into the fire. The other warriors tensed, waiting to see how she'd respond. Clara stood slowly, meeting his hostile gaze. In her growing Apache vocabulary, she said, "Your anger is with change, not with me, I understand. But burning feathers won't change what is." Bidzi's hand moved toward his knife. "White woman speaks Apache like child, knows nothing of our way." "Then teach me." Clara kept her voice steady. "Or does your courage only extend to destroying women's work?" The insult landed perfectly. Warriors didn't harm women's crafts, it showed weakness. Poor character. Bidzi flushed, caught between backing down and escalating against someone he couldn't honorably fight. Satso's voice cut through the tension. "Bidzi will teach tracking to my wife-to-be. She must know how to read sign, find game, unless he thinks this task beneath a warrior." Trapped, Bidzi had to agree or admit cowardice. He chose teaching, though his lessons were harsh. He led Clara on grueling walks, pointing out tiny disturbances, a broken twig, compressed earth, the way grass bent. He clearly hoped she'd quit, complain to Satso, prove herself weak. Instead, Clara embraced the challenge. Her father had taught her some tracking, and she built on that foundation. When Bidzi showed how rabbits moved through brush, she practiced until she could predict their paths. When he demonstrated reading weather sign, she memorized cloud patterns and wind shifts. "Why do you not give up?" Bidzi demanded after a particularly difficult lesson left them both exhausted. "Because I gave up one life already," Clara replied. "I won't waste the second." Something shifted in his expression, not friendship, but perhaps the beginning of respect. The night before the marriage ceremony, Lilui helped Clara prepare. Apache brides wore their finest clothes, and the women had worked secretly to provide them. Soft deerskin dress decorated with beadwork, moccasins that fit perfectly, jewelry of silver and turquoise. "You are nervous," Lily observed, braiding Clara's hair with practiced fingers. "Terrified," Clara admitted. "This morning I was Clara Walsh, widow. Tomorrow I'll be... who? Yourself, but more." Liloui's hand stilled. "My brother is good man, hard. Yes, chief must be, but fair, honorable. He will not." She searched for delicate words. "Will not demand what you do not wish to give." Clara understood. This marriage was protection and alliance, not romance. Yet remembering Satso's rare smiles, the gentle way he'd held her hand that first night, she wondered if friendship might grow between them. Perhaps, in time. Something more. "Tell me about him," she said. "Not the chief, the man." Lilouis smiled. "He carves wood when troubled birds. Always birds. Speaks to horses like old friends. Cannot cook anything without burning. Laughs at coyote stories like a child." Her voice softened. "Lost too much, too young. Parents to soldiers. First wife to sickness. Carries responsibility like stones. Maybe you help him remember joy exists." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She stood outside her wickiup, watching stars wheel overhead. The camp slept peacefully, dogs occasionally barking at shadows. Tomorrow would change everything. Again, no turning back, no middle ground. "Second thoughts," Satso's voice came from darkness. He stood nearby, also wakeful, in moonlight. He seemed younger, less burdened. Clara remembered the fevered man she'd dragged from mud, how his hand had gripped hers. Now that same hand would join with hers in marriage. "Third and fourth thoughts," she admitted. "But not doubts. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." He moved closer, careful to maintain proper distance. "I have thoughts too. Wonder if I ask too much. You saved my life. I answer by pulling you into danger." "I was already in danger. You gave me a way to face it standing rather than cowering." They stood in comfortable silence, watching stars. "Finally," Satso spoke again. "Tomorrow changes things, but know this: you choose how much change. I will be husband in name, protection, provision. Anything more waits on your word." Clara felt warmth that had nothing to do with the mild night. "Thank you for understanding, for patience." "Apache no patience. We wait for rain, for game, for justice." A smile touched his voice. "I can wait for trust to grow." Dawn came too soon, bringing the day that would transform Clara Walsh into something new, wife to an Apache chief, member of the band, bridge between worlds that seemed impossibly far apart. As women came to help her dress, their faces now familiar and welcome, Clara felt the last of her old life slip away like smoke. In its place, something new took root, fragile as spring grass, but reaching toward sun with stubborn hope. The marriage ceremony had been 3 weeks past when the traitor revealed himself. Clara had settled into the rhythm of Apache life dawn prayers, communal work, evening stories around the fire. She was learning to read the subtle signs of her new world when everything shattered like ice in spring thaw. It started with missing supplies. Small things at first, a pouch of ammunition here, dried meat there. The band had survived on less, so few noticed. But Clara, trained by ranch life to track every resource, kept careful count. When medicine herbs disappeared from her stores, she brought concerns to Lilouis. "Someone trades with outsiders," Lilouis concluded, her face grim. "But who would risk the band for profit?" The answer came from an unexpected source, young Nitus. The boy Clara had nursed through fever, approached her one evening as she gathered firewood. His eyes darted nervously as he tugged her sleeve. "Aunt," he whispered the title the children had begun using for her. "I saw something wrong." Clara knelt to his level. "What did you see?" "Karuk meets white men by the old mine, takes things from camp. They give him bottles that smell bad, make him walk funny. Karuk, a warrior who'd lost his family to cavalry raids, who carried bitterness like a visible wound. Clara's heart sank. Alcohol was forbidden in camp for good reason. It made men careless, violent, vulnerable. But more troubling was the trading itself. What information might he share for whiskey? "You were brave to tell me," Clara said carefully. "But say nothing to others yet. Can you do that?" The boy nodded solemnly. Clara waited until dark, then shared Nidus's story with Satso. His expression turned to stone as she spoke. "Karuk's pain has poisoned him," he said finally. "But this threatens everyone. I must have proof before acting." That proof came sooner than expected. 2 nights later, a scout reported strange activity near the southern approach, white men studying the canyon paths with field glasses. Satso doubled the guards and prepared to move the band if necessary. But the danger was already inside their walls. Clara woke to smoke and shouting. Not cook-fire smoke, this was acrid. Chemical. Someone had set fire to the supply cache using kerosene. As warriors rushed to fight the flames, she saw Karuk slipping toward the horse lines, a bundle in his hands. Without thinking, she followed. The wooden falcon carving pressed against her ribs where she wore it on a cord, a reminder of debts and choices. Karuk moved with desperate purpose, clearly planning to flee. In his bundle, moonlight caught on something familiar. Her breath caught. The carved wooden falcon Satso had given her Karuk had stolen it from their wiki-up. But why? What value could it have to white traders? The answer came with sickening clarity. Evidence, proof that Clara Walsh lived willingly among the Apache, that she'd married their chief. Such proof would inflame the territory, justify any action against the band. Vale would pay handsomely for such ammunition. Karuk reached his hidden horse, cached beyond the main herd. As he bent to tighten the saddle, Clara stepped from shadow. "That doesn't belong to you." He spun, hand going to his knife. Recognition flashed across his face, followed by contempt. "White woman pretends to be Apache. You poison us worse than whiskey." "The only poison here is what you've sold us for." Clara kept her voice steady, hand near her own blade. "How much did Vale pay you?" "Enough." His laugh was bitter. "Enough to buy forgetfulness. Enough to leave this dying life. And our deaths, the children who'll die when soldiers come, what price for them?" "They're dead already." Karuk's voice cracked. "Apache way ends. Better quick than slow starvation, watching our world shrink until nothing remains." Behind them, shouts indicated the fire was controlled. Soon warriors would count losses, notice who was missing. Karuk knew it too. His movements turned frantic. "Give me the carving," Clara said. "Leave if you must, but don't give them excuse to destroy us." "You are the excuse," he sneered. "Chief's white wife. They say he stole you, that we corrupt innocent woman. Your trinket just proves what they want to believe." He swung into the saddle, but Clara grabbed the horse's bridle. The animal danced nervously as they struggled. Karuk tried to strike her with his quirt, but she ducked, using the horse's movement to unbalance him. "Satso offers you mercy even now," she gasped. "Return what you've taken. Face judgment. Live with honor." "Honor?" Karuk's face twisted. "Where was honor when soldiers killed my wife? My children honor is luxury for those with hope." He spurred the horse, but Clara held tight. The animal reared, and in that moment of chaos, the bundle fell. Items scattered across the ground, the falcon carving, medicine bundles, silverwork, and something else that made Clara's blood freeze. Maps, detailed drawings of the canyon approaches, water sources, defensive positions, everything an attacking force would need. Karuk saw her recognition and went wild. He drew his knife, slashing down at her. Clara released the bridle and rolled aside, coming up with her own blade ready. They circled in the moonlight. 2 people pushed past reasonable boundaries. "You've killed us all," Clara said. "We were dead when we trusted whites." He lunged, desert-trained reflexes still sharp despite the whiskey poison. Clara dodged. her tracking lessons with Bidzi serving her well. She didn't want to fight, couldn't match his warrior training, but she couldn't let him escape with those maps. The lives of everyone sleeping peacefully depended on her. Karuk attacked again, and this time she couldn't fully avoid the blade. It caught her shoulder, sending fire down her arm, but the movement brought him close enough. She grabbed his wrist with her good hand while her injured arm went for the maps. They struggled, strength against desperation. Karuk was stronger, but the whiskey had taken its toll. His movements were slightly off, reactions a heartbeat slow. When he tried a warrior's throw, Clara remembered Satso demonstrating the counter. She shifted her weight, used his momentum against him. Karuk hit the ground hard, knife spinning away. Clara snatched up the maps, clutching them tight. He lay gasping, defeat in every line of his body. "Kill me," he whispered. "Let me join my family with warrior's death, not traitor's shame." Clara looked at this broken man, understanding his pain even as she condemned his choices. "That's not my decision, but I'll ask Satso for mercy. Prison, not death. Chance to redeem yourself." "There is no redemption for such as me." Footsteps pounded behind them, warriors drawn by the disturbance. Satso appeared first, taking in the scene with quick assessment. His eyes lingered on Clara's bloodied shoulder, and something dangerous flickered across his face. "He lives," Clara said quickly. "The maps are safe. The falcon, too. No proof leaves camp." Satso nodded slowly, then spoke rapid Apache to his men. They bound Karuk with surprising gentleness, understanding that he was broken in ways beyond physical. As they led him away, Satso turned to Clara. "You're injured." "It's shallow." Though now that the fight energy faded, the wound throbbed viciously. Karuk needs help more than punishment. His grief has driven him mad. Perhaps, but madness that endangers the band cannot be tolerated. Satso's voice was heavy. "The council will decide. You'll testify. If needed." He stepped closer, examining her shoulder with gentle fingers. "This needs cleaning, stitching. Why did you follow him alone?" Clara held up the carved falcon, its wings now spotted with her blood. "He had this and these." She showed the maps. "I couldn't let him give Vale ammunition against us." Something shifted in Satso's expression. "You bled for a wooden bird." "I bled for what it represents, for the choice I made, for the people who accepted me." She met his eyes steadily. "My people now." He was quiet for a long moment, then called for Li Lui to tend the wound, as his sister worked with skilled hands. Satso studied the captured maps. "These are detailed. He's been planning this for weeks, maybe months." His jaw tightened. "Vale grows bold and clever, using our own pain against us. What will happen to Karuk?" "The council will meet at dawn. His actions warrant death, but..." Satso sighed. "You spoke truth. Grief can poison the mind. Perhaps exile if he shows genuine remorse. Your word will carry weight, you who suffered from his betrayal." Clara thought of Karuk's desperate face, the names of dead children on his lips. "Then I'll speak for mercy. The dead are gone. The living need hope, not more graves." Dawn brought the council, held in the open so all could witness. Karuk stood with dignity despite his bonds. Facing judgment without excuses, he confessed fully the meetings with Vale's men, the information traded, the plan to frame Clara as unwilling captive. When Clara's turn came to speak, she stood despite her bandaged shoulder. In careful Apache, she argued for understanding. Karuk had lost everything to violence. That loss had festered until he saw only more loss ahead. Yes, he'd chosen wrongly, but from pain, not evil. "We all carry wounds," she concluded. "Some heal clean, others fester, but even festered wounds can be cleaned, given proper care." The council deliberated while the band waited. Finally, Naichi spoke their decision. Karuk would live, but in exile. He must leave Apache lands, never return. If caught again treating with enemies, death would be swift. As they stripped Kuruk of his warrior marks, Clara saw tears on weathered faces. This was little better than death. An Apache without his people was a ghost walking. But it was life, and where life remained, so did possibility. Before Kuruk left, he approached Clara. "Why speak for me?" "Because I've been where you are, lost everything, saw only darkness ahead. Someone gave me second chance." She touched the falcon carving at her throat. "Maybe someday you'll find yours." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Perhaps whites and Apache are not so different in pain. I pray you're right about chances." As Kuruk rode away, Satso stood beside Clara. "You showed wisdom beyond your years, and courage. The council notices such things. I showed what your people taught me, that strength isn't just in fighting. Sometimes it's in choosing not to fight." That evening, as Lily changed her bandages, the older woman smiled. "You're becoming Apache in truth, not just name. Even Ella speaks well of you now." Clara thought of Kuruk, riding alone toward uncertain future, of Vale, still plotting in his comfortable house, of the choices that led her to this moment, bleeding for people not born hers. "Maybe that's what family means," she said softly. "Choosing to bleed for each other, even when the wounds come from within." The ambush came at Bitter Creek, where the canyon narrowed to barely 20 feet across. Clara rode with a small party, Satso, Old Naichi, 3 warriors, and herself returning from council with a neighboring band. They discussed alliance against growing pressure from settlers and soldiers. The talks had gone well, hope rising like morning mist. Then Mac Doyle's rifles shattered that hope like thunder breaking silence. The first shot took their lead scout from his horse, as echoes bounced between canyon walls. Clara understood with sick certainty they'd been tracked, waited for, caught in a perfect killing ground. Rock walls rose sheer on both sides, no cover except scattered boulders. Ahead and behind, rifle fire erupted from hidden positions. "Down!" Satso commanded. Sliding from his mount, his paint stallion screamed and fell, blood spreading across its spotted hide. Clara rolled from her mare, landing hard behind a boulder as bullets whined overhead. Her Winchester was in its saddle scabbard, 20 feet away across open ground. All she had was Samuel's Colt and memories of her father saying, "In ambush, movement means death. Think first, move once." Naichi pressed against the opposite canyon wall. Arrow knocked despite the futility of bow against rifles at this range. 2 warriors found scant cover behind dead horses. The third lay still where he'd fallen. "Clara Walsh," Mac Doyle's voice boomed from above. "Throw out your weapons. Mister, Vale wants words with you. The savages can die here or later, your choice." Clara's mind raced. How many attackers? From the firing patterns, at least 8, probably more. Positioned high with clear fields of fire, no way out except through them. But something else caught her attention, smoke wisping from the rim. Not gun smoke, camp smoke. Doyle's men had been waiting long enough to get comfortable, maybe careless. "Thinking time's over," Doyle shouted. "Show yourself, or we start with the old man." A rifle cracked. Rock chips exploded near Naichi's head, drawing blood. The elder didn't flinch, but Clara saw his ammunition pouch nearly empty. They'd traveled light, expecting no trouble. Foolish, fatal. Unless... She studied the canyon walls. Sheer, yes, but weathered. Cracks and ledges marked where winter ice had done its work. A desperate plan formed. "I'm coming out," she called, standing slowly. "No," Satso's command cut sharp, but she was already moving. Clara stepped into the open, hands visible but not raised. She needed Doyle's attention, needed his men watching her instead of the others. Each step felt like walking through honey, time stretching as rifle sights tracked her movement. Smart woman. Doyle called. He showed himself now, confident in superior position. Vale's got plans for you, legal-like. Gonna testify how these savages stole you, forced you into ungodly marriage. Clear his name. See justice done. Justice! Clara laughed, surprising herself with its genuineness. Is that what you call poisoning wells and burning barns? Call it what you want. You're coming with us. He gestured to his men. Boys, if any of them red devils twitch, drop 'em. Clara saw Satso tense, ready to die fighting rather than see her taken. But she had other plans. As she walked, she'd been watching that camp smoke, calculating wind direction. The winter had been dry. Spring growth was tinder waiting, and Doyle's men had built their comfort fire upwind of their positions. Mac, she said conversationally, still walking. Did Vale ever tell you I was raised by a combat medic, learned interesting things, like how to make smoke signals, or how pine pitch explodes when heated just right? Confusion flickered across his scarred face. What are you? The first explosion cut him off. One of his men had built their fire too close to a pitch-heavy pine. The combination of heat, dry wood, and wind created instant chaos. Flames leaped to nearby brush, spread by the same breeze that had hidden their smoke. Fire! Someone screamed above. Half of Doyle's men turned to fight flames threatening their position. In that moment of distraction, everything changed. Satso moved like his namesake Wind, reaching Clara in 3 strides and pulling her to minimal cover. Naichi's arrow found a target despite the range desperation lending strength to his draw. The 2 warriors opened fire with their few bullets, making them count. But they were still outnumbered, still trapped. Fire or not, Doyle's men held the heights. Clara pressed against Satso, feeling his heart race beneath her palm. This might be their end, but at least... War cries erupted from the canyon mouth. Apache warriors flooded in the allied band they'd just left. Drawn by gunfire and smoke, they'd followed, suspicious of the same signs Doyle had missed in his arrogance. Now they came like vengeance itself, scaling the unclimbable walls with intimate knowledge of every handhold. The ambushers became the ambushed, caught between fire and warriors. Doyle's men scattered. Some tried to flee higher, only to find Apache already there. Others attempted to fort up, but defensive positions work poorly when enemies come from all directions. Clara watched Doyle realize his trap had snapped shut on him instead. His scarred face went pale as a warrior appeared behind him. War club raised. But Satso called out in Apache, "Take him alive." The battle turned rout. Vale's hired guns, tough enough against settlers and farmers, broke entirely against warriors who'd been fighting such battles for generations. Within minutes, it was over. 3 of Doyle's men lay dead, the rest captured or fled. The fire, contained by stone walls and Apache firefighting, smoldered out. Mac Doyle knelt in the canyon bottom, hands bound. Staring at the tables turned, blood ran from a gash on his temple, and his breathing came ragged. The assembled warriors waited for Satso's word, knives eager for revenge. "You murdered Standing Elk," Naichi said, identifying the fallen scout. "His death demands blood." Murmurs of agreement rose. Apache law was clear life for life, but Clara stepped forward, an idea forming. "Wait," she faced Satso. "Vale sent him. Vale gives the orders, pays the bills. Doyle's just the weapon." "Weapons kill," someone muttered. "Yes, but information wins wars." Clara turned to Doyle. "You know Vale's business, his connections, where he keeps records, Sheriff Daly's involvement, all of it." Doyle spat. "I ain't no rat." "No, you're a man who just tried to murder 6 people for money." Clara let contempt color her voice. "But you're also smart enough to recognize when the game's changed. Vale won't rescue you. To him, you're expendable. Failed tools get discarded." She saw the truth hit home. Doyle had worked for Vale long enough to know the man's nature. Loyalty flowed only upward in that relationship. "What are you proposing?" Satso asked quietly. Clara smiled, cold as winter morning. Mr. Doyle is going to write out everything. Names, dates, crimes, all of it. Then he's going to deliver it to someone who can act on it. No territorial judge will take Apache testimony, Nietzsche observed. No, but they'll take mine, and Doyle's confession, properly witnessed. She looked at the assembled warriors. We need more than violence. We need law to work for us, not just against us. Satso considered. Around them, warriors shifted restlessly. This wasn't their way, paper and law courts instead of immediate justice. But times were changing, whether they wished it or not. Standing Elk is still dead. Bidsi said he'd been with the relief force, fought well. His family needs answer. Clara thought quickly. In my world, when someone causes death through criminal action, they can be held responsible for murder even if they didn't pull the trigger. Vale ordered this ambush. That makes him guilty of Standing Elk's death. Your world's law would punish Vale for this, Satso asked. With the right evidence, yes. Doyle's testimony could see Vale hanged. The warriors exchanged glances. Justice through enemy's own laws held appeal using white man's rules against him. Poetic, even. Doyle understood his position. If I write this confession, testify. What happens to me? Prison, Clara said bluntly. But you'll live, more than Standing Elk got. It took hours, Doyle wrote slowly, painfully, but thoroughly. Every crime, every payoff, every corrupt official. The document grew damning with each page. Clara made him write it twice, one copy for them, one to be delivered. As sunset painted the canyon red, they prepared to part ways. The Allied band would take Doyle to Fort Buchanan, where Clara had written a letter to Lieutenant Marcus Webb. She'd treated the young officer's sister once. Years ago. He was honest, ambitious. This evidence could make his career while cleaning up the territory. Will it work? Satso asked as they watched Doyle led away. Maybe, probably. Vale's made enemies. This gives them ammunition. Clara touched her bandaged shoulder, still tender from Karuk's knife. Either way, we've planted doubt, made him vulnerable. Sometimes that's enough. They buried Standing Elk at sunset, Apache ceremonies mixing with Clara's quiet prayers. Another good man lost to greed and hate, but perhaps his death might mean something if it brought down the system that killed him. That night, camping under stars, Satso sat close beside Clara. They'd grown easier with each other these past weeks, partnership deepening into something neither quite named yet. You fought well today, he said, with mind, not muscle. Perhaps this is the future, using their weapons against them. Both have place, Clara replied. Your warriors saved us, but winning battles isn't enough if we lose the war in courtrooms and Congress. Wise words. He was quiet for a moment. When I was shot, dying, I dreamed of eagles. They told me a pale woman would show new paths. I thought fever dream. Now I think eagles see farther than men. His hand found hers in darkness. Whatever comes, I'm glad you chose this path. Clara squeezed gently. So am I. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Vale would react to Doyle's disappearance. The army still searched, their fragile peace balanced on knife's edge. But tonight, under ancient stars, surrounded by people who'd become family, Clara allowed herself a moment's hope. They'd turned an ambush into opportunity, used enemy strength against him. Perhaps Satso was right. Perhaps this was the future, not just fighting the white world, but understanding it well enough to make it fight itself. The wooden falcon pressed against her chest. Carved wings spread toward tomorrow's possibilities. The box canyon at Thunder Ridge should have been their grave. Three forces converged in the narrow defile as the sun reached its zenith. Cyrus Vale's hired guns from the south, a cavalry unit from the east, and the Apache war band trapped between them. Clara crouched behind weathered sandstone. Samuel's ledger clutched against her chest. watching their carefully laid plans crumble like dried clay. It had started with hope. Doyle's confession had reached Lieutenant Webb, just as Clara planned. The young officer, hungry for advancement and genuinely disturbed by the evidence, had begun investigating. But Vale had deep pockets and deeper connections. Word came that Webb had been suddenly transferred to a distant post, his replacement arriving with orders to pacify hostile elements with extreme prejudice. Now those elements, her family, her people, faced annihilation in this stone trap. 20 cavalry, maybe 15 gunmen, Bitsy reported, sliding down from his vantage point. They coordinate, block both ends. Satso studied the canyon walls, calculating. Around them, 30 warriors checked weapons with practiced calm. The women and children were hidden deeper in the caves. But if the warriors fell, that refuge would become a tomb. "The ledgers," Clara said suddenly. "They're what Vale fears most." She'd spent the previous night transcribing Samuel's old mining records, finally understanding what her late husband had discovered. Vale had been systematically filing false claims, rerouting water rights, building an empire on forged documents. The evidence was damning if it reached the right hands. "Papers won't stop bullets," Naichi observed grimly. "No, but they might stop the man firing them." Clara stood, mind racing. "Lieutenant Carson down there. He's new, following orders. What if those orders are based on lies?" "You want to negotiate?" Satso's voice held doubt. "They came to kill, not talk." "Then we make them listen." She pulled out the wooden falcon, stringing it beside the ledger around her neck. "I'll need someone who speaks perfect English. And Dakea." The old woman looked up from preparing bandages. "What foolishness now. I need you to tell them a story. About a widow, a wounded man, a choice made from compassion." Clara managed a tight smile. "The truth has power. Grandmother, let's use it." 20 minutes later, Clara stood at the canyon mouth, hands visible but near her pistol. Beside her, Dakea leaned on a walking stick, looking every inch the harmless elder. Behind them, just visible, Satso waited with drawn bow, a reminder that talking didn't mean surrendering. "I want to speak with Lieutenant Carson," Clara called out. "And whoever commands Vale's men." Silence stretched before a young officer emerged from cover, uniform crisp despite the heat. His face showed confusion, whatever he'd expected. It wasn't negotiation. "Ma'am, you're ordered to surrender immediately. You're being held against your will by hostile—" "I'm exactly where I choose to be, Lieutenant," Clara interrupted. "With my husband and his people. I believe you've been given false information about our situation." Behind Carson, she saw Vale himself, mounted on his black gelding. The land baron's face flushed with rage. "Don't listen to her, Lieutenant. She's been corrupted by these savages, turned against her own kind." "Is that so?" Clara pulled out the ledger. "Then explain these documents. Mr. Vale, your signature on false claims, receipts for bribes to Sheriff Daly, records of water rights stolen from legitimate holders." Vale's hand went to his gun, but Carson raised a hand. "Let her speak." This was the moment. Clara nodded to Dakea, who began in accented but clear English. "I tell you true story. Last autumn, rain fell hard. Apache warrior, shot by white men, washed up at widow's door. She could let him die safer, easier. Instead, she brought him in, fed him, healed him, asked nothing." The old woman's voice carried surprising power. "When he left, she thought story ended, but warrior remembered. When evil men burned her home, he came, offered protection, honor, new life. She chose courage." "Lies," Vale snarled. "She was kidnapped." "Then why did I return to my cabin for these—" Clara held up the ledgers. "Why gather evidence of your crimes instead of escaping when I had the chance, Lieutenant? You're an educated man. Look at these documents. See who the real criminal is." Carson hesitated. Around him, soldiers shifted uneasily. They'd come expecting to rescue a captive white woman, not debate legal documents with one who clearly stood with the Apache by choice. "Even if what you say is true," Carson said slowly, "I have orders. These Apache have raided." "In response to attacks on them," Clara interrupted. "Lieutenant, I was there when Vale's men burned my barn, trying to force me to sell. These people saved me from that. Yes, men have died on both sides, but who struck first, who profits from the violence?" She saw doubt creeping across young faces. These weren't hardened Indian fighters, mostly recruits following orders they didn't fully understand. But Vale's hired guns were another matter. They shifted restlessly, hands near weapons, waiting for violence to erupt. It was Satso who changed everything. Stepping into view, he spoke in perfect, unaccented English, the mission school voice he rarely used. "Lieutenant Carson, I am called Satso, chief of this band. What Mrs. Walsh says is truth. We've raided no innocent settlers, taken no lives except in defense. But this man," he pointed at Vale, "has poisoned wells, killed our people, stolen land through lies and violence. We seek only to live in peace on what remains of our homeland." The shock on Carson's face was almost comical. An Apache chief speaking educated English, making reasoned arguments instead of war cries. It shattered every expectation. "He's lying." Vale's voice had gone shrill. "They all lie. Lieutenant, do your duty." But Carson was reading the ledgers Clara had tossed to him, face paling with each page. "Mr. Vale, these documents, they show systematic fraud, if authentic." "They're forgeries, Indian lovers and savages conspiring." "Actually," a new voice interrupted, "they're quite genuine." Everyone turned as a rider approached from the east. Clara's heart leaped. Lieutenant Webb, supposedly transferred, wearing civilian clothes but bearing an official marshal's badge. "Marcus," Carson blurted, "I thought you were—" "Transferred, so did Vale's friends." Webb smiled coldly. "Instead, I've spent 3 weeks gathering federal authorization. Mr. Vale, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and murder." Chaos erupted. Vale spurred his horse toward escape, but Bidsy's arrow took the animal in the flank, sending both crashing down. His hired guns, seeing the game lost, scattered like quail. Some ran for the canyon exits, finding them blocked by Apache who knew every secret path. Others threw down weapons, surrendering to suddenly uncertain soldiers. The battle was brief but vicious. Vale, cornered and desperate, drew his pistol. His shot went wild, stone chips spraying near Clara, before he could fire again. Satso's arrow caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He fell hard, all arrogance leaking away with his blood. "Interesting," Webb observed as order restored. "An Apache arrow wound. Clearly self-defense against a federal fugitive. No crime there." While soldiers rounded up prisoners. Clara knelt beside Vale. The wound was serious, but not fatal. Satso had aimed to disable, not kill. Vale's pale eyes fixed on her with naked hatred. "You ruined everything," he gasped. "Chose savages over your own kind." "I chose justice over greed." Clara replied quietly. "Chose family over blood. That's what you never understood. Mr. Vale, family isn't about shared skin. It's about shared values." Dakaya appeared with medical supplies even for enemies. Healing was offered. As Clara worked to stop the bleeding, she felt Satso's presence behind her. "Will he live?" the chief asked in Apache. "Yes, to face trial, lose everything he schemed for." She met Satso's eyes. "Better justice than death, I think." "Your justice," he said softly, "teaching us new ways to fight." Lieutenant Webb approached as Vale was loaded onto a travois. "Mrs. Walsh, or should I say Mrs. Satso, your testimony will be crucial. You'll need to come to Fort Buchanan." "Together," Clara said firmly. "My husband and I together, under guarantee of safe passage." Webb glanced at Satso, clearly struggling with protocol. But Carson, still holding the damning ledgers, nodded support. The chief's testimony would clarify much. Marcus, and he's clearly not what we expected. It took hours to sort everything out. Vale's surviving men were arrested, wounded tended, weapons collected. The Apache dead 3 warriors, including brave Standing Elk, were prepared for proper burial. Through it all, Clara moved between worlds, translating, mediating, building bridges word by careful word. As sunset approached, an unexpected peace settled over Thunder Ridge. Soldiers and warriors who'd been moments from killing each other now worked side by side, clearing the canyon of battle's debris. Young Lieutenant Carson found himself deep in conversation with Naichi about tracking techniques. Dakea bandaged a trooper's burned hand with the same care she'd show her own grandson. "Is this what you saw?" Satso asked Clara as they stood apart, watching. "When you chose to save me, did you see this possibility?" "No," Clara admitted. "I saw only a hurt human who needed help. Everything else." She gestured at the mixed gathering. "Everything else grew from that one choice." Webb approached with papers. "I'll need you both at the fort within the week. With your testimony and these documents, Vale's entire network will crumble. Sheriff Daly's already been arrested." "And after," Satso's voice held warranted suspicion, "when trials end, what happens to my people?" "That's beyond my authority," Webb admitted. "But this case will reach Washington. A chief who speaks perfect English, allied with a white woman who chose Apache life, it challenges every assumption. Change is coming. Slow, maybe, but coming." As the various forces prepared to depart, Clara felt the weight of the moment. They'd won this battle through words and laws rather than bullets alone. It wasn't the Apache way or the white way, it was something new, born from necessity and nurtured by hope. Vale, pale and bandaged, was loaded onto an army wagon. As it rolled past, he turned pain-filled eyes on Clara one last time. She saw no repentance there, only confused rage that his certain world had crumbled. He'd never understand what she'd learned, that strength came not from taking, but from choosing what to protect. "Ready?" Satso asked, offering his hand. Clara took it, feeling calluses that matched her own. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, testimonies, trials. The slow work of changing minds, one truth at a time. But tonight, they'd return to their people with news of victory won through courage and cooperation. The wooden falcon bumped against the ledger at her chest, past and future. Apache craft and white man's law. Bound together like the unlikely family they'd become. As they mounted their horses, Clara looked back at Thunder Ridge. What should have been a grave had become a birthplace, instead the first fragile shoots of a different way forward. Behind them, Lieutenant Carson called out, "Mrs. Walsh, Mrs. Satso, thank you for showing us another path." She raised her hand in acknowledgement, then rode toward home beside her husband, carrying hope like a seed that might, with careful tending, grow into something neither world had imagined possible. The morning sun painted the Apache camp in shades of gold and rose as Clara stood before the ceremonial fire, Samuel's ring warm in her palm. Around her, the entire band had gathered not for crisis or war council, but for the formal joining that would bind her to Satso and his people with bonds deeper than paper law. 3 months had passed since Thunder Ridge. Vale's trial had shaken the territory, his network of corruption unraveling like a poorly woven basket. Clara and Satso had testified together, their partnership powerful evidence that peace was possible between peoples. The federal judge, moved by their testimony and the overwhelming evidence, had not only convicted Vale but recommended new policies for Apache-settler relations. Now, with external threats diminished, it was time for internal bonds to be acknowledged. "You're certain?" Lilui asked, helping Clara into the wedding dress, soft white doe skin decorated with intricate beadwork, each pattern telling stories of joining, strength, and new beginnings. "This ceremony makes permanent what was temporary. No going back to your old world." Clara smiled, fingering the wooden falcon that never left her neck. That world died when Samuel did. This one gave me life again. She paused, then added quietly, "And your brother gave me reason to want it." Liloui's eyes sparkled. "I wondered when you would admit what everyone sees, the way he watches you, the way you turn to him like a flower to sun." Heat touched Clara's cheeks. Over the months, what began as an alliance of necessity had deepened into something neither had expected. The quiet evenings by their fire, Satso teaching her to read weather signs while she helped him with written English, the shared laughter when her attempts at traditional bread failed spectacularly, the moment during a lightning storm when he'd held her close, and she'd realized his arms felt like home. Has he said? Clara couldn't finish the question. "My brother guards his heart carefully," Liloui said gently. "He lost much when his first wife died, but for you, those walls have fallen. He carves constantly now, birds in flight, always in pairs." Outside, drums began their ancient rhythm. Clara took a breath, tucking Samuel's ring into her medicine pouch alongside other treasures, a river stone from her first successful hunt, a feather from the eagle that had circled their joining at Thunder Ridge, pressed flowers from the meadow where Satso had first said he loved her in halting English. The ceremony itself was unlike anything from Clara's world. No priest, no vows written by others. Instead, Naichi spoke of balance, how strong partnerships required both unity and independence. Like two trees growing close but not choking each other's light. Warriors sang of Satso's deeds, but also of Clara's courage. Women praised her healing hands and growing skill with traditional crafts. When Satso stepped forward, he wore his finest clothing, buckskin decorated with porcupine quills, silver ornaments that caught the firelight. But Clara barely noticed the finery. His eyes held hers with intensity that made her heart race. "Before our people," he said in Apache, then repeated in English, "I take this woman as wife, not from obligation or debt, but from choice. She has walked between worlds to stand beside me. I promise to shelter her as she shelters me, to provide as she provides, to honor her ways as she honors mine." Clara's response came in carefully practiced Apache, drawing approving murmurs from the elders. "Before these witnesses, I take this man as husband. He offered protection when I had nothing. Now I offer partnership in all things. His people are my people. His struggles are mine. Together we are stronger than apart." The physical ceremony was simple hands joined over the fire, a blanket wrapped around both their shoulders, shared drinks from a ceremonial vessel, but the weight of it, the permanence, settled into Clara's bones like heat from the flames. Then came the unexpected addition. From her pouch, Clara withdrew her knife, the one Satso had sharpened that first week, now honed to razor sharpness through constant use. From his belt, Satso drew its twin, one he'd made to match. "In my culture," Clara said, addressing the gathered band, "wedding rings show eternal connection, but rings are passive things. These blades are tools, weapons, instruments of survival. Like marriage, not just for show, but for use, for work, for protection." Together, they laid the matched knives before the fire. The symbolism was clear partnership in labor, in defense, in the daily work of living. Several elders nodded approval. This white woman understood that Apache marriage meant more than ceremony. As celebration began, feasting, dancing, appropriate stories of other unions, Clara found herself pulled into the joy of community. Children she doctored through illness now tugged her hands, demanding she join their games. Women who'd once watched her with suspicion now shared wedding night advice that left her blushing and laughing. Even Bidzi, once her harshest critic, offered grudging congratulations. "You've earned your place," he said simply, "not through marriage, but through bleeding for us, working beside us. The marriage just acknowledges what already was." As night deepened, Satso led Clara to their wickiup, expanded now, improved over months of shared labor. Inside, familiar items mingled her few treasures from the cabin. His carvings, their tools arranged just so. Home, built from two lives joining. "I have something for you," Satso said, producing a small wooden box. Inside lay a ring not gold like Samuel's, but carved from horn, inlaid with turquoise. "I learned this custom from watching you touch Samuel's ring, if it brings comfort." Clara's throat tightened. "It's beautiful." She slipped it on. Perfect fit. "How long have you been working on this?" "Since the day you chose to stay." His voice dropped. "I knew then I wanted you to have something of both worlds. Apache craft. White custom. Like us." She reached up, framing his face with her hands. "I love you. I should have said it at the ceremony, but the Apache words still tangle my tongue, and—" He stopped her with a kiss, gentle but thorough. When they parted, his smile was wider than she'd ever seen. "Words matter less than actions. You've shown love every day in your work, your courage, your choice to stay. But hearing it—" He spoke in Apache, then translated, "My heart flies like the falcon you wear." Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Clara reflected on the strange paths that had led here. A year ago, she'd been a grieving widow, alone and struggling. The storm that brought Satso to her door had seemed like more hardship. Now she understood sometimes storms cleared ground for new growth. "Tell me about tomorrow," she murmured against his shoulder. "Tomorrow we check the eastern hunting grounds. The day after, Council meets about the new treaty proposals. Next week, Dakea wants you to help with a difficult birth." His arm tightened around her. "Ordinary days, hard work, simple pleasures, life." "Our life," Clara corrected, and felt him smile. Outside, the camp settled into sleep. Dogs barked occasionally. Night birds called. The same sounds that had once seemed foreign now meant safety. Family. Home. Clara dozed, waking once to find Satso watching her in the moonlight. "No regrets?" he asked softly. She thought of the cabin where Samuel died, the garden veil destroyed, the world that had no place for a widow who wouldn't surrender. Then she looked at this man who'd shown her strength could be gentle, that different peoples could build something new together. "No regrets," she confirmed. "Only gratitude for storms that bring unexpected gifts." Dawn came softly, bringing the sounds of camp stirring to life. Clara rose to help with morning tasks, wearing her new ring alongside the falcon carving. Women called greetings, addressing her with the title that meant chief's wife, but also one who belongs. Children ran to show her treasures found in the night. Elders nodded approval as she passed. This was her world now, not the one she'd been born to, but the one she'd chosen. Built on compassion, strengthened by trial, sealed by love. As Satso joined her for the morning meal, their hands touched briefly familiar gesture. Still thrilling. Around them, their people prepared for another day of survival, another day of life. In the distance, an eagle circled on morning thermals. Clara watched it rise, remembering Satso's fever dream of eagles promising change. The change had come, written in quiet moments and grand gestures, in blood spilled and peace won. "What do you see?" Satso asked, following her gaze. "The future," Clara replied, "high and wild and free." He smiled, understanding. Together they turned to the day's work, partners in truth now, building tomorrow one shared task at a time, in this borderland between worlds. Love had grown not like a fragile flower, but like the desert plants around them, tough, enduring, beautiful in its strength. The rising sun blessed their union with gold, and life moved forward as it always had, as it always would, one choice, one day, one love at a time. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, courage, and bridging two worlds in the Wild West. I hope Clara and Satso's journey touched your heart as it did mine. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what this tale meant to you. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Hit that like button. And don't forget to press the hype button to help more people discover these tales of the American frontier. Your support means everything and helps keep these stories alive. Until next time, partners.